What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Clinic Growth Secrets Show. This is Jeff VK, your host as always. Solo episode today. We're going to talk about profitability in a clinic and the different stages of profitability. If you get some value from this episode, don't forget to pay the fee and share the show forward. We don't run ads or provide any sponsorships or anything like that on the show, so we do grow totally organically over here by word of mouth. So you sharing the show is truly the only way that our audience grows and our message reaches more people. And so if you're a cash-based provider, you know largely that this show is for you. This is where we help fight back insurance to ultimately make clinics great again, where patients have high compliance and the clinics and the providers have high profits as well. And speaking of profits, we're going to dive deeply into profitability of a clinic today. And we're going to talk about the different stages of profitability and what that means for you as the owner of the business. Okay. And so before we get into this, wanted to just quick note that this is not any sort of financial advice. I'm not a financial planner. I have built our own business to multiple million a year, and I've helped a lot of clinics do the same. And so I wanted to share again the different stages of profitability and what you can expect along your own journey as you begin to create a profitable clinic. Okay. So in the early stage of a business, okay, I'm defining early stages as, let's say, less than maybe 25 or $30,000 a month. Your business should aim to be highly profitable. Now, this is very counterintuitive to what some management programs and what some coaches will tell you. When what happens is that when people start the early stages of the business, they have a lot of stuff. Okay. And so one example is you get yourself underwater by having too much overhead. So maybe you are a brand new clinician, you've just got out of school, or maybe you've been an associate for a few years and you want to go on and start your practice. And you, for some reason, go out and buy this massive facility. I'm talking about 4 or 5, maybe even 6,000 square feet. You got tons of fancy equipment, tables, lasers, all the works, maybe some shockwave, the whole 9 yards is in there. Okay. And while that's good, I think that's a classic field of dreams mentality is that if I have a big facility and a lot of machinery, I'll naturally have more revenue. And I can't tell you how many times that I have seen that not become true. Okay. So when you're starting out, when you don't have a lot of patients, when you don't have a lot of sales, when you don't have a lot of predictable monthly cash flow, you want to have a low overhead. Okay. In fact, I've seen clinics do insanely well, talking about $70,000 to $80,000 a month out of 1,500 square feet. Okay, a couple tables, X-ray for mandatory, films, that kind of stuff. But the when you have this massive nut, okay, when you have this thing, so like let's say again, you start this 4,000 square foot facility, you've got all the bells and whistles. I mean, just to break even on a monthly basis, your overhead might be 35, 40 grand. Okay. And so what happens is that you're constantly racing against that bill, which puts a lot of pressure on the business. And a lot of times, okay, if your overhead's $40,000 a month and you don't have adequate sales, there are months that you might operate a little bit in the red, which is completely unideal as you start your business. Okay. And so in the initial stage of a practice, again, 0 to 25, probably even $30,000 a month, you want to have high profit margin. You want to keep your overhead low and you want to be able to bank as much money as you can in this initial stage because you need to stack up 3 to 6 months of non-variable overhead expenses just to have that in the bank in case of a rainy day. Okay. And so in the beginning, your goal is, yes, you as the owner, is you're doing a lot of the work, you're doing the patient care, you're doing the sales, you're doing a lot of the operations stuff in terms of patient scheduling, maybe even some billing, that kind of stuff if you have a little bit of insurance. And that's okay because you're trading your time. But on the back end, you get to keep a lot of the money that you make because you're not paying a big team or you don't have a big overhead. And when you get to keep a lot of the money you make, you can save that money in a fund, and that allows the business to have security. It allows you to weather the storm when things go a little bit sour on you, which you're going to have up and down months no matter what. Okay. But if you can be really profitable in that initial stage of the business and stack your cash in a separate bank account, separate from your operational, a savings business account, a business savings account, then you can have peace of mind. Because if you have 3 to 6 months of expenses in a bank account, now you can actually start to look a little bit long term. Because the problem is when we're just chasing our nuts, our overhead, and we're barely breaking even, or maybe some months we're making a couple $1,000, some months we might be losing a couple $1,000. it really keeps the brain in a really scarce mindset and kind of that survival mode. And it doesn't allow us to really think too far into the future from an investor standpoint. So it becomes tough to actually think about the vision because you're so focused on, I just got to make 40 grand this month to cover my nut, to cover my nut. You know what I mean? Versus if your overhead is, let's say, 8,000 bucks a month, that makes it a lot easier for you to cash flow as the owner and then also have adequate surplus to again keep money in the bank to save up for that 3 to 6 months non-variable overhead. Okay, so 3 to 6 months is, let's say your overhead's 10,000 bucks a month. You want to have 30 to 60,000 dollars cash in a bank separate that you can go to on a rainy day. That gives you security as the owner, your team security, and ultimately just allows you to think a little bit more long term. Okay, so that's kind of the early stage of the clinic. So in the early stage, you want to be highly profitable. Okay, don't let anyone fool you on that. You want to be highly profitable so that you can stack a little bit of cash. Okay, now if you're listening to this and you're like, hey, I'm on my third clinic. I've exited multiple clinics. I've got cash in the bank. I have, a couple 100,000, maybe even $1 million in the bank. Then it's a little bit different for you. I get that. Okay. You can operate a little bit more risky because you have that surplus. Okay. So the assumption in the early stage for the listener is that you don't have that surplus and cash is going to be king at this stage. Okay. Now in the middle stage we'll define as, between 30 and 60,000 bucks a month. Okay. That's kind of the middle stage. Now, this is where I like to see clinics be even more profitable because again, you have higher surplus. And so what you can do is you could start to slowly increment your overhead. So let's say your overhead's 10,000 bucks a month to get started. You can add a few teammates, okay? Maybe some CAs, maybe even an office manager, that kind of stuff. And your overhead's not going to increase crazy proportionally, okay? But what it'll allow you to do is it'll allow you to expand the capacity of the business. And so let's say you're able to, with a couple teammates, take your business from $30,000 to $60,000 a month. And now your overhead goes from $10,000 to $15,000 a month. Okay. Or maybe even $10,000 to $20,000 a month. Well, that's okay because your business now has the ability to increase almost twofold, $30,000 to $60,000. That's a $30,000 a month increase. Your overhead increase is 10. There you go. That's an extra $20,000 in profit and surplus for the organization every month. Okay. So even in that $40,000 to $60,000, we don't need to be fancy. We don't need to add a bunch of fancy equipment. We don't need to add a bunch of overhead. We don't need to add these big machines. There's a common misconception in the service business is that we have to add more at any period of time, add more machines, add more equipment, add more services to get to that next, $60,000 or $80,000 a month. And most of the time, that's not true. In fact, you can usually get to $1 million a year or $83,000 a month pretty easily offering one service to one person in one market. For example, you could basically get to $1 million a year just selling cash chiropractic services. Okay. And when you get to $60,000 a month, all you need to do is you need to do more or multiply what's working to get to $80,000 a month. So if you're at 60 and you want to get to 80, spend more on ads, call more leads, maybe check on your pricing to see what kind of arbitrage you have, check on your retention. You don't need to necessarily default to adding more expenses. Okay. So just focus on doing more in that middle stage, getting more leads, making more calls, making more sales without adding a bunch of complexities that just create a bunch of overhead. Okay. Now, there's a place for that we're going to get to in a second, which is in the later stages of the business. But in that middle stage, let's say, 40 to 60 grand, 30 to 60 grand, whatever you define as a middle stage clinic, then again, you want to be even higher profitability to, again, keep stacking the money so that you can eventually go out and make these big investments that are going to return tenfold. Okay. Now, in the later stages, okay, let's define later as you're getting close to that million, right? You're getting close to $1 million a year. We want to be able to, again, add systems, add team, and then increase advertising. Now, in this stage, you may experience a little bit less profitability because as you get to that level of income, you're going to start to be taxed quite a bit. Okay, the percentage that you're going to have to pay out in tax, it's a very weird stage. From 80 to $100,000 a month in a business. You could make very good money, but you're going to pay a large proportion of that in taxes. And so it becomes a point in a business where we actually want to reverse the profitability. So in those early stages, we had high profit, able to stack cash, able to keep a lot of money in the bank. But at this stage, if we played our cards right, we should already have a lot of cash in the bank. And now what we can do is we can actually choose to operate at a lower margin. So if you want to take the business from 80,000 to, $280,000 a month, that's going to require you to operate at a lower margin some months. Okay, because some of those months you're going to have to spend a lot of money on advertising. To get from 80 to 280, you are going to have to add more services. You are going to have to add more team. And at that point, you're going to want to invest in the business, because what that's going to do is it's going to increase your capacity by buying team, buying systems, buying machines, but it's also going to reduce your tax liability. So it's because you don't really need the liquid anymore, because you remember in the early stages, in the middle stages, we spent time saving money. And so in this later stage, we can be more aggressive. Like, we don't need to show a profit or high profit every single month, because we don't necessarily need the cash, but we want to be able to invest in the business to get a higher, basically high organizational value. Okay. So you're just trying to increase the size of the organization in that later stage in the business. Okay. And so you will have to operate at that stage on a little bit less profitability if you do want to increase that capacity and you do want to take it from, let's say, 80 to $280,000 a month. Okay. It just requires you to do a lot more. And at that, usually when you want to get past 1 million to go to 2 million, you do have to start adding in more services. Okay. But the beauty of that is you've already got the cash, and it'll help you reduce some of your taxes as well. So for example, in our business, like, we were insanely profitable at CGA. We've been very profitable up until this year. Okay. Most of the time we're running close to a 45% margin, just to be clear. Okay. Now, you might not run at a 45%, but you always want to shoot for at least 30% profit margin. Okay. So that means if you collect $1 million at the end of the year in total collections, you're able to take home 300. Okay. That's a healthy margin. All right. Anything less than that, you usually want to shoot for a little bit higher, figure out where you can cut some costs or where you can increase the margin. Okay. Now, when you get to the later stages, though, it's okay to operate your business at a 10% margin, right? It's okay to operate even some months at a 5% margin, because all you're doing is you're taking the profitability and you're reinvesting in the business. And from personal experience, that can be a little bit of a different mindset shift, because you went from cash flowing the business, seeing lots of thousands of dollars a month in profit, and now all of a sudden you're still making the same money in terms of collections, but what you're going to find is that you're not taking it home, which is totally fine. Again, because you're using that money to invest in the future, to build a stronger infrastructure when it comes to the organization. Okay. So that may happen at the later stage in terms of profitability. And so, as a recap here, just to keep this short and sweet for y'all today, early stages, be very profitable. If you're starting from scratch, keep your overhead low, keep your burn low. Okay. Make it so it's easy for you to profit money every single month so that you can start to stack your savings. When you get to the middle stages, try to make even more profit, even more savings. And in that way, you have the rainy day fund and an investment fund. And then at the later stages, you'll have that cash flow from the early stages to be able to reinvest in the business, to ultimately scale it to whatever level you want to be. And then that just requires you to operate a little bit differently as the owner in terms of being more comfortable, not seeing like very, very high profit margin month after month after month. But what it'll allow you to do is reduce your tax liability, but then also build a more strong and stable organization for the future. So hopefully that's helpful. It's just some different ways to think about profitability in a business. Again, you're not always going to be able to run a 40% margin or 30% margin at scale, and that's okay. Some months are going to be very profitable. Other months you might run 5, 10%, and that's normal in a business to have those ups and downs. We typically run our business to where 1 year is extremely profitable, and the next year, such as the year we're in right now for us, is very, very unprofitable. We'll spend a lot of the money growing the business. So it's kind of an every other year cycle just to keep the cash up. So the 1 year you make a lot of profit, stack the cash. Next year you end up reinvesting most of the profits back into the organization. So that way you have a little bit of stability year after year in terms of when you're going to cash flow and then when you're going to invest. So hope that's helpful, guys. If you got some value from this, pay the fee. I know this is very different than a lot of things people teach in practice management stuff. They teach that you have to be profitable all the time and you have to take a lot of money. And while that's cool, if your goal is to have a massive impact and have a very large organization that impacts a lot of people and impacts humanity, there are some months you're going to have to spend time reinvesting and not take out the profits from the business. So if you got value, hit the share button. We do grow organically around here. I always appreciate you guys for tuning in to the Clinic Growth Secrets show. We'll see you guys on the next one. Cheers.